now estranged attorney Michael Cohen, aired on television. Much of the dialogue in the tape was garbled, but the thrust seemed to be that one of the men on the call had a personal history consistent with what you might expect from a longtime Atlantic City casino owner. Consorting with loose women was a main theme of the conversation. Well, for viewers who had until recently assumed that Donald Trump was a conventional Midwestern evangelical, this must have been a total shock. For everyone else, those of us who've read the New York Post every day for the past 35 years, it was not. But for the professional hysterics in cable land, the Cohen tape was the breakingest possible breaking news. Was the breakingest possible Hindenburg flame moment. A stop the presses Hindenburg flame moment. Brief selection of the pandemonium. It was unbelievable. Here's a brief selection of the pandemonium from last night.
It's a CNN exclusive. We're back now with our breaking news. It's a CNN candidate Donald Trump and his attorney Michael Cohen. Then candidate Donald Trump and his attorney Michael Cohen.
Released a recording tonight.
Breaking news: CNN has exclusively obtained a secret audio recording.
The president is firing back at that audio recording.
The breaking news we're covering tonight, the Cohen-Trump audio recording.
Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. 500 years after Galileo, the universe has once again been reordered, this time by the American news media. Donald Trump sits at the center of it. Everything is about Trump. Every word he utters is existentially appalling. Every statement he makes is the single greatest moral outrage since the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. In the eyes of Washington, Donald Trump is pure badness, unadulterated 200-proof evil. And this has effects. Because they believe Trump is utterly, entirely bad, the left no longer feels the need to acknowledge nuance of any kind or practice restraint. Just a few years ago, they might have called him a crappy president. Today, they tell us he's a fascist dictator like Mussolini, but of course much worse than Mussolini, because he's not Mussolini, he's Donald Trump!
I believe we're in a lot of trouble here that I've never seen before in my lifetime of any president. And I would like Obama to speak out against it.
What he wants to do is set working people against working people, black working people against white working people.
A president is not a monarch or a dictator, notwithstanding the fact that Donald Trump often fancies himself in that fashion.
That is exactly what you see in authoritarian regimes.
So what happens if you keep talking like this every day for a year and a half? Well, some people will take you seriously. They believe you when they say their country is becoming a dictatorship, and they get angry. Some of them will become violent. At least one might shoot up a congressional baseball game, and who knows what might happen next. Meanwhile, Democratic leaders stand back and watch all of this, mostly hoping the mob doesn't turn on them, as ultimately it will. The Democratic Party is changing very fast, and few know this better than former Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman. He lost a primary fight during his party's last leftward swing over a decade ago. Now, this week, he wrote a piece begging Democrats not to vote for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's the Democratic socialist in New York who's almost certain to win a congressional seat this fall. Electing her, Ocasio-Cortez, Lieberman says, would hurt the Congress, hurt the Democratic Party, and hurt America. Senator Joe Lieberman of Connecticut joins us tonight. Senator, thank you for coming on.
Great to be with you, Tucker. Thank you.
So this candidate is being presented and may indeed be the future of the Democratic Party. Her ideas are the cutting edge of progressive politics right now. Why is that bad?
Well, obviously, she's got a right to her ideas, but if her ideas take hold in the Democratic Party, it's not only not the Democratic Party that I joined a long time ago in the inspiration of John F. Kennedy, progressive on social issues domestically, kind of pro-business, pro-growth in terms of economic policy, and a strong foreign policy based on American national interest and values. I mean, she calls herself a democratic socialist. To me, she's more of a socialist than a Democrat. And that's not good for the party that, though it rejected me in Connecticut in 2006, I continue to be a member of, although I'm obviously independent in who I support, including John McCain in 2008. So, you know what really worried me about this after Ocasio-Cortez beat Joe Crowley? During the campaign, she called for the abolition of ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement Section. It made no sense. I can come back to that. But after she won, 3 credible Democratic candidates for president in 2020 embraced the same call. And it's like the old story about Robespierre during the French revolution, I got to get out in front of the mob. Those are my followers there, you know.
What happened to Robespierre at the end? Do you remember?
It didn't end well for Robespierre.
So that's kind of the question I wanted to ask you. So I think you could have a real debate on all of these issues, but the one that you just highlighted, abolishing ICE, deeply unpopular with the public. It's going to be hard to win a campaign on that issue, and I think on the merits it's a bad idea. I'm sure a lot of leaders in your party feel that way. They agree with you. They're not saying it in public. Where are the adults to say that?
I agree. Not enough. I mean, substantively, unless you're against all enforcement of immigration and customs laws, you need an enforcement agency like ICE. These folks are against the Trump administration's immigration policy. They can't make a rational argument against ICE. So where are they? More people should be speaking out. It was kind of interesting that when Ocasio-Cortez beat Crowley, somebody asked Nancy Pelosi about it, and she said that was in one progressive district. It doesn't represent the Democratic Party around the country, which I found heartening, also very practical, because the Democratic Party will not have any chance of retaking the House if the image of the party is Democratic socialist. It just doesn't work. Democrats don't like the idea of socialists in power in America because it's not who we are.
Democrats are more liberal on immigration, obviously. That's fine.
Right.
But you can't find a Democratic office holder who will explain clearly, and I've tried night after night, what exactly our border policy should be. You can't get a vigorous defense of the idea of borders out of a leading Democrat right now. And some of them, like Keith Ellison, are openly saying borders are themselves racist. They're inherently immoral, borders. How do you feel about that as you watch?
Well, that just doesn't go with me anyway. A country, a great thing about America, let me say first, is that from the beginning, we never defined ourselves primarily by our borders, but by our values and the Constitution, Declaration of Independence. But once you say that, you got to have borders. You have to have rules for who can come in and who can't come in. I happen to be generally positive about immigration and what it does and has done for our country and can still do, but not just open the borders and say anybody can come in. That's a country without rules, and we are a country of laws. So that's the kind of policy that's never going to make it in America, even though most Americans, I think, have a generally favorable attitude toward new Americans who are immigrants.
Yeah, I think that's true. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker. Good discussion.
Well, always the first casualty of political extremism is humor that is taken out into a field and executed. Ali Stuckey learned that the hard way this week when she released a parody video. She edited the video to make it look like she was interviewing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Here's part of it.
Do you have any experience that qualifies you for this job?
I was growing up during the Clinton era, and then basically when I was in middle school, 9/11 happened.
Do you have any knowledge whatsoever about how our political system works? Why should voters vote for you?
You vote. It's democratic.
Well, this has been enlightening.
Well, that was a joke. It's not real. The congressional candidate, at whose expense it was made, didn't think it was funny. She complained on Twitter. Now the woman who created it is being attacked as a purveyor of fake news. She is Ali Stuckey, and she joins us tonight. Ali, thank you for coming on. Did you mean
Thanks
this
for having me.
to fool viewers into believing it was news? Was it intended to be seen as a joke?
Of course, it was intended to be seen as a joke. A satire has played a very important part in political dialogue for a long time, and I'm certainly not apologetic for playing a part in that. And this particular tactic that we use, we certainly didn't come up with it ourselves. We have seen comedians since the 1970s and 80s doing similar things. It was never meant to actually deceive, but it was supposed to be very obvious that it was satire. And for the vast majority of people, Tucker, this was obvious. Most people got an appreciation appreciated the joke. But of course, you see the manufactured outrage from people on the left who believe that humor is exclusive to the hilarious people on late night shows and comedic geniuses like Michelle Wolf and Samantha Bee. Apparently, comedians are not, or conservatives are not allowed to tell jokes no matter what. So that's what I learned this week.
Well, I'm not sure anybody's allowed to tell jokes. I mean, let me ask you, and please be honest, when was the last time you heard a liberal laugh? And not sardonically or bitterly or in rage, but actual mirth. Like, I'm amused, ha ha ha. Look at me, I'm carefree. Have you seen that in the last year and a half?
No, you're absolutely right. And the reason why their jokes are exclusive to attacking conservatives and attacking Donald Trump is because it's the only kind of humor that's actually protected. So you can be as mean as you want to against Donald Trump because, you know, he's a bigot, he's a bad person, and everyone who supports him is too. So it's okay to be cruel towards those people. Those jokes are protected. But any joke that might point out the eccentricities of any other group, well, that's off limits. So that's why humor has become exclusive to attacking conservatives, because it's the only kind that will actually allow you to keep your job.
So if you're living without humor, haven't you already lost? And aren't you existing in a prolonged living hell that rots your soul and torments you? And do you take pleasure from that fact?
Right. Well, I think we probably already know that about a lot of Democrats, but especially about socialists. Look, we already know that they lack a basic understanding about economics and geopolitics. It's not that surprising that they also lack an understanding of humor.
Yeah, wisdom begins with humor, I think. Allie, great to see you.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks. We've got a Fox News alert for you tonight. House Republicans are moving now to impeach the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. What do we make of this? Well, for an analysis, we bring, we think, one of the most balanced people in Washington, Jonathan Turley, professor at George Washington University Law School. We don't even know his politics. We can't even guess at them. We're not going to guess at them. We just want to know what he makes of this. Professor, good to see you. What do you make of this?
I'm not a big fan of it. It's a serious problem when you go from dissatisfaction to sort of DEFCON 1, and that's really what impeachment is. It's a perilous path to take. The last time we really did this was in 1876 with William Belknap, and that was a case of clear bribery. This is the type of disagreement that occurs between the branches. Now, having said that, I think that the Republicans have a legitimate gripe here. I do think that the Justice Department has a bad record in what they have redacted, their slowness in producing material. So I get all that. And that may be a basis for contempt. But you don't want to lower the standard for impeachment to make it a routine tool in which you could use when you have a gripe with someone in the executive branch.
Wouldn't it be more effective to first make your case in public slowly and clearly so that voters understand what you think this official has done wrong?
I think that's exactly right. Look, even though I disagree with what Rosenstein has done so far, I don't think he's done enough in that sense. He actually has produced more information than most of his predecessors. And so the case is not particularly strong in terms of history. But I think that these Republicans have to think very seriously about what they would create here. The framers made impeachment difficult for a reason. They don't want impulse buy impeachments. They don't want this to be a visceral reaction. And I'm afraid I'd put this in that category.
We're about to see a lot more impeachment potentially if the Democrats take the House, I would say. So I want to ask you about this Cohen tape. So we learned last night on another channel, which breathlessly played this again and again, that the President of the United States, once a casino owner in Atlantic City, had at one point consorted with loose women. And I don't want to shock our viewers, but that's what we learned. What do we make of the tape itself, the leaking of it? Is this within the law? Are there ethical or legal implications of this?
Well, it is likely within the law in the sense that New York is a one-party consent state. So as long as Cohen is a consenting party on that conversation, he makes it under the wire. The ethics issue is much more serious. I consider this to be a flagrantly dishonest and disloyal act by a lawyer. It's not the first time I have been shocked, frankly, by Michael Cohen's style of practice, if you can call it that. But most lawyers would find this deeply unethical. The ABA years ago lowered the standard. At one time, this would be a clear unethical act under the ABA rules, under state rules. The ABA sort of of created an ambiguous standard. But the interesting thing is New York is one of those jurisdictions that has been very strong on this type of secret taping. They did say in 2003 that it's not immediately clearly unethical, but they said that that's only because sometimes a lawyer might have to tape something because of the great societal risk that a conversation might have. But they said you can't do this as a routine matter. That would be unethical. And this strikes me as well over the line as to what he has done.
I knew Michael Cohen, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I have to say I always wondered, like, why would you hire Michael Cohen as your personal lawyer? Like hiring Bernie Madoff as your accountant. Pretty unwise, I think. Professor, great to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Intelligence officials practice rampant bias on the job and then walk away with a security clearance, an invaluable security clearance, which you do not have after they leave. It's out of control. What's the fix for this? We'll tell you next. Well, the White House has moved to revoke security clearances for John Brennan, the former CIA director, and others, is being treated somehow as an unparalleled assault on democracy itself. Weird, because it's not clear why giving cable news extremists a security clearance is good for America. But to the left, apparently, it's a central part of the function of government, along with letting non-citizens vote and ignoring the Second Amendment. So what exactly is the reasoning for this? John Summers is a former staffer for Senator Harry Reid, and he joins us tonight. John, thanks a lot for coming on.
You bet. Thank you, Tucker.
So you can't see him, but I'm looking at my cameraman now, who served in the U.S. Army in artillery in the first Gulf War. And he served his country in war. He left. He did not get to take his howitzer with him. Why would John Brennan, who no longer works for the government, get to take his security clearance with him?
Well, because I think what we're seeing is actually another exposure of President Trump's willful lack of ignorance about what this all means. First of all, two of the people he listed don't even have security clearances to begin with. But the reality is what he's actually doing, rather than punishing the people who he's mad at right now, what he's actually doing is putting up an obstacle in front of the people who actually work under him and his administration, who are working to keep us safe. Because what happens is those people...
I'm confused. So... Okay, but how does John Brennan, and I want to understand this, sincerely, I don't want to interrupt you, but how does allowing John Brennan, who is a cable news pontificator and a political extremist, you compare his views against the public opinion polling, he's on the extreme, how does giving him a top secret clearance when he does not work for the government, how does that help America?
Because, no, and I think that's a really important question, and I'm glad you asked it. Because,
I know, that's why this show raised it originally.
Right, because the people like him, whether you like him or not, are valuable resources to people who are currently in the intelligence industry, who are serving under this administration. They've got a lot of contextual knowledge. They've got a lot of experience. So, and there aren't a lot of people who can match that, who've been through these sort of fires that the intelligence community goes through.
No, okay, first of all, just to be clear, John Brennan never served as John Brennan never served as a spy. He's a wholly political guy. He was not out in a trench coat, in Vienna in the 80s fighting the Soviets. He was a desk guy his whole career, appointed by Obama to this post, is entirely political, and is making statements that, again, accusing the president, quote, of treason and threatening the president, for whom the CIA works directly. Their job is to inform the president. This guy is the president's political enemy. That's fine. It's allowed. Of course, I'm not against it. But in what way specifically could the current CIA use this specific man's expertise to make America safer? Like, paint a scenario for me. Make me feel better.
Because it's not just the CIA, and I've not actually worked in that branch of government, so I've not been through those through those scenarios. But the reality is, like I said, there are very few people who have that. There are very few people who have that knowledge and expertise, and so
what knowledge and expertise?
Look at the crises that we're going through right now and the importance, the major situations that we're going through in North Korea, with Russia, with Iran. You've got people who have served under multiple administrations who have a lot of knowledge on both sides of the political spectrum. And I think when you talk about...
But hold on, I'm not talking about... Slow down. I'm not talking about a lot of people. I'm talking about John Brennan specifically, the former head of the CIA, who walked out of a government job with maybe the single most important government asset he could take with him, which is his access to top secret classified material. So,
well, that's where you're wrong.
Again,
he doesn't have access to classified information. He only has access. He doesn't. He has access to the information that he had when he left. It's on a need to know, and the need to know if he is contacted and asked for assistance.
Here's why it's significant, because it lowers the legal threshold for current CIA employees to call and tell him classified things. It lowers their legal exposure and allows them to leak against the administration, which they are sworn to serve. So you can see the downside, but you have not explained the upside. I don't understand what the current CIA would get out of this.
Up to a 10-year prison sentence. So no, it actually doesn't indemnify them from the responsibility
really? Because
of maintaining classified information.
They're doing
but I want to be clear about what they actually have access to and what they don't, because I don't think the public understands this. And again, this is for people who have served under both Republican and Democratic administrations. And I think
I'm not talking about
that's
people. I'm talking about Brennan. Look, the bottom line is that we don't need
just
Brennan to have a security
about
clearance.
A couple of people. The
it's
same
about
standard
a guy
should be
who's
held
at NBC. Okay, but no, if you go on NBC and become wildly partisan, which is his right under the First Amendment, maybe you forfeit your right to have a government security clearance. That's all I'm saying. And no one can explain why that's bad, other than it's Trump and Trump is evil.
Because it's all partisan and it all targets just a small pool of people. If he actually has an issue the way he described, then it should go against Republicans and Democrats and all people.
I agree, but
and that would be a
all right, John, we're out of time.
Problem.
They're barking at me in my ear. Maybe the CIA. Thank you. Great to see you tonight.
You too.
Well, the past year of various Russia investigations have completely dominated the business of government in Washington, but there was supposed to be a payoff at the end. We were supposed to find a sinister plot between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin to take over American democracy, but we didn't find that. Instead, we found that our own intelligence agencies are, in some cases, hotbeds of partisan bias and political extremism. Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, John Brennan over at CIA, still has a security clearance. All of this adds up to the perception that maybe we shouldn't be vesting this level of trust in our own intelligence agencies. That's a sad thing. What can we do about it? Trey Gowdy is a congressman representing South Carolina. He's the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, retiring, and he joins us tonight. Mr. Chairman, thank you for coming on.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So first, just a News of the Day question. I watched as the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee both seem to suggest that John Brennan deserved to have a security clearance. And I'm confused. What possible benefit to American national security would be served by letting John Brennan keep his security clearance?
The only theoretical benefit, Tucker, and I'm just playing the devil's advocate, is if his successor wanted to discuss a fact pattern with him, having that level, that security background clearance would enable that conversation to take place. Having said that, having a security clearance is very different from having access to the documents. John Brennan, who, by the way, said President Trump was guilty of a crime for which he could be hanged, said he should be in the dustbin of history. I cannot imagine Mike Pompeo or Gina Haspel ever having any reason to talk to John Brennan. And the president can decide who does and does not have security clearances.
Right. What I can't imagine is how the Speaker of the House could look at the stories describing what John Brennan has said in the past year, totally irresponsible and extreme statements, and say, you know, that's the man we want to have a security clearance. I don't understand how you could reach that conclusion. Do you?
The only story I saw was that Paul thought that Brennan was being intentionally provocative, that the president should just ignore Brennan. I have not spoken to Paul about it, but it's not just Brennan. I mean, it's also Comey. I mean, Comey is telling everyone to vote Democrat, so Bernie Sanders will be the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. So how would you like to be investigated by this gaggle? Brennan, Comey, Strzok, Page, and oh, by the way, there are other DOJ and FBI officials that haven't been named because they're not at that level. They're not at the SES level, but they also had animus towards President Trump. Those are the folks that were in these dispassionate, neutral, objective roles investigating the person that ultimately became president of the United States. The American people deserve an intelligence and a justice system that is as devoid of politics. I get that the president gets to pick the AG and pick the FBI director, but beyond that, facts are not Republican or Democrat. Neither should our justice system be or our intelligence community.
So very quickly, Democrats on the Hill are enjoying this because it serves their short-term partisan interests, and so they're abetting it. But if you talk privately to any of them who acknowledge that at some point there's going to be a Democratic president, and is that person going to be comfortable knowing that the intel agencies could turn against him and destroy his presidency? I mean, are they thinking this through at all, do you think?
Yeah, there are plenty of reasonable folks on both sides of the aisle. They don't always make it on television.
Yes.
But I think one of the challenges and one of the reasons that I'm glad to be doing another line of work come 2019 is the ultimate objective right now is to win. I mean, Adam Schiff says he has evidence of collusion between the Russians and President Trump. He said it over a year ago. He's presented to absolutely no one. There's no accountability for it. They want this investigation to drag on as long as it possibly can because it's going to affect the midterms and they'll get the gavels in their hand. And what I would hope all of my federal citizens, regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat, is just have higher expectations and demand more from your elected officials. It's not just about winning. It's also about governing in a responsible way that is worthy of people's respect.
Adam Schiff accused me of working for Putin. He's an irresponsible buffoon. It's sad to watch it, actually. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Try working with him. Try working with him. It's worse.
I can't even imagine. I can't.
Yeah,
our empathy goes out to you.
Thank you.
Well, the Attorney General has singled out colleges for turning bright young minds into sanctimonious fools, authoritarians. He's clearly right. Just how bad are things on campus? Should you stop participating in the system that's destroying America? We'll talk to a college professor about that coming up. The Attorney General Jeff Sessions addressed a high school leadership summit on Tuesday. He had strong words for the colleges these high schoolers will be attending in the next few years. Here's part of what he said.
Freedom of thought and speech on the American campus is under attack today. Rather than molding a generation of mature, well-informed adults, some schools are doing everything they can to create a generation of sanctimonious, sensitive, supercilious snowflakes. We're not going to have it.
Anyone who's paying attention, of course, knows that Sessions has a point. The sciences are still strong in some cases, but the liberal arts increasingly are a joke, a bad joke that's bankrupting the country, brainwashing our kids to hate the values that built the United States. Gender neutral pronouns, biased response teams, riots against conservative speakers. Colleges increasingly resemble dystopias rather than academies of learning. Jason Nichols is a professor of African American Studies at the University of Maryland, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
We could have a subjective debate about the climate on campus, and it would be, we could go back and forth. But instead of doing that, why don't we have a little quiz here? And I want you to be as honest as you can possibly be. I'm going to read a couple of statements to you, and you tell me what would happen if I said this on the quad or in class, in the humanities class at the University of Maryland. I'll start the first one. Quote, I believe that marriage is the union between a man and a woman. For me as a Christian, it is a sacred union. God is in the mix. What would happen if I put that on a placard on your campus?
What would happen is it would generate a discussion. We would have an open exchange of ideas, and people would talk about their different views. What we have right now is...
no, wait, hold on. But, by the way, I should say, I'm quoting Barack Obama there. Just that's the kind of secret in this. He said that during the campaign.
Sure,
the presidential campaign in 2008. But no one would call me a hater or a phobic of some kind or say that I was alt-right. I mean, of course somebody would.
No, I mean...
And teachers would be very offended by that if I said that. And you know that's true.
Well, here's what's true. First of all, ad hominem is kind of the area of the right-wing extremists. That's what they do. What we do on the left is actually have real debates and real discussions.
So if I said that, you don't think that I would be at risk of my grade going down in my class, honestly?
No, absolutely not. And I actually take offense to that.
Absolutely not.
I take absolute offense to that.
Well, I've got 3 kids in college, so I have some sense of this. Right, okay.
No, but you're challenging people's integrity, academic integrity, which I think is really...
I don't mean to challenge their integrity. I mean to impugn their integrity. I mean to say, not suggest, that they have no integrity and they shouldn't be in charge of teaching our children because it's destroying the country.
And who is they?
So it's way less oblique than that. I would say the overwhelming majority of humanity professors.
And you say that from your 3 children in college, you could make that determination.
I would say that having gone to college and covering this stuff for a living. No, not all. I'm sure there are examples. I would just say the overwhelming majority.
And all of these schools
I'm not
around the country.
I'm saying they have no intent. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
And so
let's try again a second statement here. And this is about immigration and the melting pot and diversity. Quote, when I'm forced to use a translator to communicate with the guy fixing my car, I feel a certain frustration. Now I want you to be honest. If I said that I'm annoyed that some guy fixing my car doesn't speak English, I feel frustrated, I have to use a translator, I would be attacked as a racist. That's another Barack Obama quote, by the way. But you couldn't say that. I could not say that. Are you going to say with a straight face, Tucker, I can say that without being attacked?
Tucker, you say those kinds of things all the time. Right here on your show.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I'm attacked all the time.
Yeah, well, I think what people...
You're a racist or whatever. I'm attacked all the time. But it doesn't matter because I'm on TV. I'm not on college campus. I'm not a kid. You know what I mean? That's the difference.
And again, I think we can have a discussion. We can have a debate. I think what you have is a lot of really sensitive people on the right who are like, oh, if you disagree with me, I'm a victim. And that's the problem. We can't have a discussion without people feeling victimized and have open dialogue and an open exchange of ideas.
Look, I'll actually concede the point. I'll concede the point that there are people who embrace victimhood because they think it empowers them. Some are on the right. I hate that. I think being a victim is always degrading to the person who embraces that mantle. But I also think, if we're being honest, if I said that on campus, I would be denounced by professors and students as a racist, and you know that. And that's an Obama quote.
I think it's okay to denounce people. I mean, there's nothing wrong with denouncing a statement.
Oh, you do? Oh, it's okay to denounce. Wait, what about the reasonable conversation we are going to have? Okay.
Yeah, no, we can have,
we're out of time,
a conversation where I still denounce what you say.
But it's okay to denounce.
That's what we do every time we come on here, Tucker. I denounce what you say, but we still have a reasonable conversation.
Professor.
Oh, you always do.
Nice to see you tonight.
Thank you, Tucker.
Wall Street is throwing money at tech companies, dubious tech companies that make no money. Not just a little bit of money, a lot of money. Could it be putting your investments and our entire economy at risk? Our exclusive investigation next. Technology is a major driver of our economy, of course, but something odd is happening in tech world recently, and it hasn't gotten enough attention. Real innovation is being displaced by an almost mystical belief in the power of technology to make a business, any business, viable. This mystical belief could be endangering the economy. Our show sent Fox Business's Hillary Vaughn to investigate this trend. Here it is.
This was the scene on Wall Street the day that Blue Apron went public. The company almost instantly became cash rich. On the day of its initial public offering, it raised $300 million. But there's a problem. Blue Apron hasn't made a penny in profit. It's been bleeding cash every year since it started, failing to post an annual profit.
They're in the business of making big bets and taking big risks. If most of their companies fail, but a few of them get massive returns, that was exactly their goal.
But Blue Apron's story is the new normal in American finance. More than 3/4 of all companies that went public last year lost more money than they made. It's because investors are eager to bet millions of dollars on bright-eyed, ambitious startups that don't make any money, hoping they are the next Google or Microsoft.
Yes, there is reason to worry. Today, there are certainly some companies that you have to put an awful lot of optimistic assumptions together to justify the valuation.
This strategy means companies that don't make money can massively outraise companies that do. Tesla has failed to turn a profit year after year, but its market cap has blown past Ford Motor Company, even though Ford cranked out $8.4 billion in profit just last year. Today, Tesla is worth $54 billion compared to Ford's $42 billion. The trend could be seen as a sign of a coming crash.
Ultimately, companies do have to stand on their own 2 feet, and that does mean generating cash. And the question then is there enough runway, either through the cash that they already have or their ability to raise more cash in the future, that gets them to that point?
Companies running huge losses, cashing in on going public is catching on. Some of the industry's biggest firms, Snap and Twitter, weren't turning a profit when they went public. Snap, the hottest tech IPO in years, still isn't. Its stock was up only $1 on its 1-year anniversary, trading on the New York Stock Exchange.
The hope is that they can switch on profitability at a later date, that they will find this magical monetization model, that Tesla will figure out a way to make money on the cars that it produces, that Snap will find out a great way to monetize its large user base.
The risks are supersized. If the companies fail to ever turn a profit and investors bail, billions and billions of dollars in value could suddenly disappear.
Tucker, not only are investors out of luck if these companies fail, but they could be getting duped from the start. The National Bureau of Economic Research says, on average, almost half of all unicorn startups are way overvalued. They checked out 135 companies with billion-dollar values and found that 65 of them were totally off base. Tucker?
It's an amazing story. Thank you, Hillary. I appreciate it. Well, here's another remarkable fact. And it tells you the country is not the country you remember. Nearly a quarter of the United States speaks a language other than English at home. Can a country hang together that doesn't share a common language or culture? It's a question that we ought to be talking about and aren't enough, but we will after the break. Stay tuned. The Migration Policy Institute finds that 22% of all Americans do not speak English at home. Todd Dubois is the spokesman for U.S. English, and he joins us tonight. So, Todd, I'm going to right to the concern. Hello. It's not that, everyone should be forced to speak English because English is so great. The point is that countries that are not united by a language and a common culture tend to break apart. Do they not?
That is absolutely correct. And in fact, pretty recently, the Pew Research Center did a study in 2016 that was published in 2017, and they were looking at global attitudes, and they found that majorities in every country and 9 in 10 Americans, in fact, considered language knowledge vital to your identity as a citizen. And in fact, 9 in 10 Americans consider English very important as part of an American identity, and so we should be
well, sure. I mean, if you're going to completely change the population of the country, okay, you can make a case for that, but you can't make a case for doing that without having everyone unite behind a commonality, a common language. Harry Reid, several years ago, when an English-only bill came through Congress, described it as, quote, racist, even though language is not a racial category. What exactly is the argument against making English the official language?
Well, it's quite absurd from the point of view of my organization, U.S. English. The general meme is it's somehow sending a divisive message, that it's saying that those who don't know English are somehow not welcome. That is absolutely not the case. In fact, in just this April, we polled likely voters in this country, and 73%, 7 in 10, agreed English should be the official language. That included majorities of Republicans, independents, and even Democrats, 59%. Yes. And we've also found in general polls through many years that, over 80%, 4 out of 5 Americans generally agree with it. There is broad support for this, and English is certainly important. Brookings Institute did a study called Investing in English Skills in 2014. Working age adults that don't know English well, they earn 25 to 40% less than those who do know English.
I'm just interested, what were the numbers among African American voters on the question of speaking English? Were they supportive, or did they think it was racist to ask people to speak English?
I believe that was about 7 out of 10, and for ethnicities right. Other than white and black, it was also over 70%. was quite impressive.
Exactly. So there's no racial divide on that question because, in fact, it unifies us to speak the same language, obviously. So ignore the propaganda. Todd, thank you. Great to see you.
Yes, I think it's very unfortunate that some politicians would want to try to be divisive about it and demagogue it. In reality, it's support for English is very broad-based, and it's going to be very important. Right. You were talking about Spanish speakers. We have the population of Spain here. Yep. Exactly.
Great to see you, Todd. Thank you. Well, we've invited, in the name of news, because we're a news show, the creepy porn lawyer onto this program. He has a few preconditions before he will agree to come. He put those in writing. We'll tell you what they are next. The Immigration Policy Institute finds that 22% of all Americans do not speak English at home. Todd Dubois is a spokesman for U.S. English, and he joins us tonight. So, Todd, I'm going to right to the concern. Hello. It's not that, you know, everyone should be forced to speak English because English is so great. The point is that countries that are not united by a language and a common culture tend to break apart. Do they not?
That is absolutely correct. And in fact, pretty recently, the Pew Research Center did a study in 2016 that was published in 2017. And they were looking at global attitudes, and they found that majorities in every country and